The classroom buzzed with energy, but Eunji Park sat perfectly still. Her small frame seemed to disappear between the massive students surrounding her. Alien cadets from a dozen different planets filled the Advanced Combat Academy's largest lecture hall, their bodies a sharp contrast to her delicate appearance. To her left, a Krelden cadet towered nearly 3 meters tall, his rocky skin glinting under the artificial lights. His muscles looked like they were carved from granite, each movement precise and powerful. On her right, a vortex species cadet shifted between solid and gaseous states, changing colors with every breath. They were giants. They were powerful. And then there was Eunji. She wore the standard gray academy uniform, which seemed to hang loosely on her thin frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her eyes remained fixed on the holographic display at the front of the room. While other cadets whispered and joked, she remained silent, absorbing every single detail of the tactical simulation projected before them. The instructor, Commander Rin Quan, a seasoned veteran with cybernetic implants running along his temple, continued explaining the complex battle scenario. Most cadets were only half listening, more interested in sizing up their competition or showing off their physical abilities. But not Eunji. Her eyes never left the display, her mind working like a computer, breaking down each movement, each strategic point. Cadet Park, the commander's voice suddenly cut through the classroom noise. Would you care to explain the critical failure point in this simulation? A moment of silence followed. Every head turned toward her. The Krelden next to her chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. The vortex cadet flickered between blue and green, anticipating her potential embarrassment. Eunji stood up slowly. She was small, maybe 1.6 meters tall, thin as a reed. Nobody expected much from her. But when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. The primary defensive line fails because of a 3-degree angular misalignment in the third quadrant, she said. The energy shield creates a 0.02-second vulnerability that can be exploited by concentrated pulse weaponry. Commander Quan raised an eyebrow. The holographic simulation froze. And indeed, Eunji was exactly right. The Krelden cadet named Janmin leaned over. Lucky guess, he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. His rocky skin rumbled with a laugh that suggested he didn't believe a word she had said. What the other cadets didn't know was that Eunji had seen more real combat in her short life than most of them would see in entire careers. Her file was classified, her missions top secret. The scars she carried weren't visible. They were written in her memory, in the way she analyzed every single detail with surgical precision. The lecture continued. Cadets returned to their casual chatter, dismissing the small human girl. They saw a fragile student who looked like she might break if someone breathed too hard near her. They didn't see the warrior. They didn't see the strategist. They didn't see the legend. Eunji didn't care. She had learned long ago that underestimation was her greatest weapon. Let them think she was weak. Let them believe she was just another human cadet. She would show them something different when it truly mattered. As the class ended, she packed her digital tablet with practiced efficiency. Another day of being invisible had begun, and she was perfectly fine with that. The military archive room was quiet. Rows of data crystals lined the walls, each holding stories of battles fought across the galaxy. Most people would never see this place. Most people would never know the real stories hidden inside these crystals. A single data crystal caught the soft light. Its surface was unmarked, but its contents told a different story. The crystal contained the classified mission report of Eunji Park during the Centauri conflict, a battle that had become nothing more than a whisper among veteran soldiers. 6 months before entering the academy, Eunji had been part of a desperate mission. The Obsidian Armada had pushed deep into human-controlled space, destroying everything in their path. Their warships were massive, their weapons unlike anything seen before. They moved like a plague through star systems, leaving only dust and broken dreams behind. The human fleet was trapped. 16 battleships cornered in the Centauri Nebula, with no hope of escape. Most military leaders had already written them off as lost. Most believed the ships would become nothing more than a footnote in the long history of galactic conflicts. But Eunji was different. She was a junior communications officer at the time, barely 22 years old. Nobody expected her to do anything special. Nobody thought she would become the reason those 16 battleships would survive. The Obsidian ships approached, their weapon systems charging. Each human ship prepared for what seemed like certain death. Their shields were failing. Their weapons were low on power. It looked like the end. Eunji saw something others missed. The nebula itself was their weapon. Using the advanced communication systems, she began a complex series of signal broadcasts. To anyone listening, it would have sounded like random noise. But to the nebula's unique gas composition and the magnetic fields surrounding the star system, it was a precise set of instructions. Her plan was crazy. Her plan was impossible. She used the communication arrays to create a massive energy pulse that interacted with the nebula's gases. The result was unexpected. The entire nebula began to shift, its gases becoming charged with electromagnetic energy. The Obsidian ships, so focused on their attack, didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. The nebula became a weapon. Electromagnetic storms erupted around the Obsidian fleet. Their advanced technology became useless. Ships that were moments away from destroying the human fleet suddenly went dark. Their systems crashed. Their weapons died. 16 human battleships escaped. Thousands of lives were saved. And nobody outside a small circle of top military leaders knew Eunji was responsible. The data crystal held the truth. A simple communication officer had turned a certain defeat into an impossible victory. Her report was brief, technical, and gave no hint of the incredible strategy she had developed in those few critical moments. Back in the present, in the academy classroom, nobody would have guessed that the small, quiet girl sitting in the corner had once saved an entire fleet. Nobody would have believed that her mind was a weapon more powerful than any battleship. Eunji continued to take notes, her pen moving smoothly across her digital tablet. To her classmates, she was just another student. To those who knew her true story, she was a legend. The data crystal continued to glow softly in the archive room, holding its secret, a testament to the day a young human officer changed the course of a galactic war. The training ground looked like something from another world, which in many ways it was. Massive holographic projections created landscapes that could shift from desert to jungle to Arctic tundra in seconds. Alien cadets moved with practiced ease, their enhanced bodies showing off strength and technology that seemed almost magical. Eunji stood at the edge of the training area. She looked small. She looked weak. But her eyes never left the simulation. Today's challenge was a complex tactical exercise. Each cadet would navigate a battlefield filled with obstacles, enemy units, and unexpected challenges. Most cadets relied on pure strength or advanced cybernetic enhancements. They had weapons that could blast through solid rock. They had armor that could stop explosive rounds. They looked like walking tanks. Commander Quan watched carefully. His cybernetic eye scanned each cadet, tracking their movements, analyzing their choices. Jamin, the massive Krelden cadet, went first. His rocky body moved like a living mountain. He crashed through obstacles, his strength breaking everything in his path. His approach was simple: destroy everything that moves. He completed the course in record time, smashing holographic enemies like they were made of paper. The Vortex cadet went next, changing between solid and gas, sliding through tiny spaces, avoiding direct confrontation. Quick, tricky, impressive. When it was Eunji's turn, most cadets stopped to watch, not because they expected much, but because they wanted to see her fail. She stepped forward, wearing the standard training gear that seemed too large for her small frame. No special weapons, no visible enhancements, just a digital tablet and a small communication device. The simulation began. Where other cadets used brute force, Eunji used her mind. She didn't try to fight every enemy. Instead, she studied the battlefield. Her fingers moved quickly on the digital tablet, analyzing terrain, enemy movement patterns, potential communication channels. Most cadets saw obstacles as things to destroy. Yunji saw them as opportunities. She found a communication frequency that the holographic enemies were using. With a few quick taps, she created a false signal. Suddenly, the enemy units began to move in completely wrong directions. They thought they were receiving orders, but they were actually following Yunji's carefully crafted false commands. What would have been a difficult combat mission became a careful dance of misdirection. Jianmin watched in confusion. His approach of smashing everything seemed stupid compared to her precise movements. The vortex cadet's color changed rapidly, showing surprise. Commander Quan's cybernetic eye tracked every move. A small smile crossed his face. Yunji completed the course without firing a single shot, without breaking a single obstacle, without using any physical strength. When the simulation ended, the training ground went quiet. "Cadet Park," Commander Quan called out. "Explain your strategy." Yunji stepped forward. Her voice was calm and clear. "Information is always more powerful than force," she said. "If you can make the enemy defeat itself, you don't need to fight." The other cadets looked at her differently now, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with a growing sense that they might have underestimated her. Jianmin approached her after the simulation. "That was interesting," he said, his rocky face showing something close to respect. Yunji simply nodded. Another day, another opportunity to show that strength comes in many forms. The advanced combat simulation room was quiet, too quiet. Jianmin stood at one end, his massive rocky body blocking almost half the training area. He looked like a walking mountain, muscles carved from stone, scales glinting under the bright lights. Next to him, Yunji looked like a child. This was the final advanced tactical assessment. Each cadet would design and execute a complex battle strategy. Points would be awarded for creativity, efficiency, and overall mission success. Most cadets spent weeks preparing. Most cadets brought elaborate presentations with fancy holographic displays. Yunji brought a simple digital tablet. Jianmin had other plans. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to humiliate the small human cadet who had been making the other alien students look bad. Her previous performances had started to make some of them uncomfortable. A human outperforming advanced alien species. Impossible, they thought. "Let's make this interesting," Jianmin growled, his voice like rocks grinding together. "I'll design a scenario that requires pure physical strength and advanced combat skills. We'll see how your little tricks work then." Commander Quan watched carefully. His cybernetic eye moved between the two cadets, scanning, analyzing. The simulation began. Jianmin's scenario was brutal. A complex urban warfare environment with multiple enemy types, heavily armed opponents, tight spaces, multiple mission objectives. It was designed to require massive physical strength and direct combat skills. Most humans would have failed immediately. Yunji didn't even look worried. Her fingers moved across her digital tablet. While Jianmin expected her to fight, she was doing something completely different. She was rewriting the simulation's core parameters. The first wave of enemies approached. Jianmin charged forward, his rocky fists smashing through walls, destroying everything in his path. He was all muscle and power. He was destruction incarnate. But Yunji was playing a different game. She discovered a critical flaw in the enemy communication systems. With a few quick taps, she created a cascading signal interference that confused the entire enemy network. Suddenly, the opponents started fighting each other. Her targeting systems went crazy. Their coordination collapsed. Jianmin stopped, confused. The enemies that were supposed to be a massive challenge were now turning on each other. Some ran in circles. Some shot their own teammates. The entire carefully designed combat scenario was falling apart. "That's cheating," Jianmin shouted. Commander Quan raised an eyebrow. "Show me your method, Cadet Park." Yunji stepped forward. Her explanation was simple and clear. In real combat, the enemy's weakness is rarely their physical strength. It's always their communication, their coordination. Break that, and you win without firing a single shot. The simulation ended. Her mission objectives were completed perfectly. Jadmin's approach would have resulted in massive casualties and mission failure. The other cadets watched in silence. Jadmin's rocky face showed something between anger and respect. He had tried to prove a human was weak. Instead, he had just witnessed something remarkable. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice less aggressive now. Yunji simply smiled. "Intelligence," she said, "is the most powerful weapon in the universe." Commander Quan made a note in his digital log. The small human cadet was proving to be something special. Very special indeed. The alarm screamed through the training facility. Red lights flashed everywhere. This was not a drill. This was real. Suddenly, the peaceful academy transformed. What had been a quiet learning space became a battlefield in seconds. A massive ship had entered the nearby star system, and its energy signatures looked hostile. The training simulation had become a real emergency. Most cadets froze. Jamin, the massive Krelden cadet, looked ready to fight. His rocky skin hardened, turning almost metallic. The Vortex cadet began shifting between solid and gas states, preparing for combat. Other alien cadets activated their special abilities, each looking like a walking weapon. Yunji remained calm. Commander Kwan's voice cut through the panic. "Defensive positions. Prepare for potential attack." But Yunji was doing something different. While others prepared to fight, she was analyzing. Her digital tablet came alive with complex data streams. Her fingers moved faster than anyone could follow, pulling information from multiple communication channels. "Wait," she said suddenly. Her voice was quiet but firm. Everyone turned to look at her. The small human cadet who had been almost invisible was now standing in the center of the room. "The energy signature," Yunji explained, "doesn't match any known hostile species. It's broadcasting on a frequency that's typically used for diplomatic communication." Janmin looked angry. "We should attack first. Better to be safe." Yunji shook her head. "That would start a war," she said simply. Commander Kwan's cybernetic eye focused on her. "Explain," he ordered. In the next few minutes, Yunji broke down the entire situation. The approaching ship was actually a diplomatic vessel that had suffered navigation problems. Its communication systems were damaged, making its approach look like a potential attack. One wrong move could trigger an interstellar incident. Most cadets would have recommended fighting. Most would have seen a potential threat. Yunji saw a problem to be solved. Using her communication skills, she helped the Academy's communication team establish contact with the damaged ship. Within minutes, what could have been a potential battle turned into a rescue mission. The ship landed safely. Its crew, representatives from a neutral planetary system, were grateful. After the incident, the other cadets looked at Yunji differently. Janmin approached her, his rocky features showing something close to respect. "How did you know?" he asked. Yunji simply smiled. "In space," she said, "communication is more important than fighting." Commander Kwan pulled up her classified file on a private screen. The document revealed fragments of her past, missions that had prevented wars, diplomatic incidents she had resolved, tactical challenges she had solved without firing a single weapon. The small human cadet was far more than she appeared. The other cadets now understood something important. Strength wasn't just about muscles or special abilities. Sometimes strength was about seeing what others missed. Sometimes strength was about thinking before fighting. Yunji returned to her seat, looking exactly the same as always. Small, quiet, easy to overlook. But not anymore. The computer screen flickered. Classified documents appeared, then disappeared. Most people would never see these files. Most people would never know the real story behind Yunji Park. Commander Kwan sat in his private office. His cybernetic eye scanned the digital records, piecing together a story that was almost impossible to believe. The small human cadet was not what she seemed. Eunji's parents were not ordinary people. They were legendary military strategists, known for solving problems that seemed impossible. Her mother, Dr. Sophia Park, was a communication systems expert who had developed breakthrough technologies used across multiple planetary systems. Her father, Michael Park, was a tactical training specialist who had rewritten how military academies approached strategic thinking. From the moment Eunji could walk, she was trained differently. While other children played with toys, she solved complex problem-solving puzzles. While other kids watched cartoons, she studied military strategy and communication systems. Her childhood was not normal, but it was extraordinary. The files showed her early achievements. At age 8, she had developed a communication algorithm that could cut through signal interference in deep space. By 12, she had created a tactical simulation that military trainers still used years later. Most adults couldn't do what she did as a child. But it wasn't just about intelligence. Her training was unique. Her parents understood that true strength was not about muscles. True strength was about thinking differently. They taught her to see problems from angles that nobody else could see. Physical training was different too. Instead of building muscle, she learned flexibility. Instead of learning to fight, she learned to avoid fighting. Movement was about efficiency, not power. Every exercise was a puzzle to be solved, not a challenge to be conquered. The classified files told a story of a child who was preparing for something big, but nobody knew exactly what. Her first real mission came early. At 16, she was part of a communication team that prevented a massive conflict between two planetary systems. Most 16-year-olds were worried about school dances. Eunji was stopping wars. Commander Kwon found a personal note in her file. It was from her father. The words were simple but powerful. Intelligence is not about knowing everything. It's about understanding how to find the answer. My daughter doesn't just solve problems. She makes problems disappear before they even start. The more Commander Kwon read, the more he understood why Eunji was special. She wasn't just a cadet. She was a carefully prepared weapon. Not a weapon of destruction, a weapon of prevention. Her physical appearance was part of her strength. She looked small and weak. People would underestimate her. And that was exactly what she wanted. The files ended with a simple statement, a mission objective that explained everything. Prevent conflict, solve problems, save lives. Commander Kwon closed the file. Outside his window, the academy continued its daily training. Cadets moved about, practicing combat skills, learning how to fight. Eunji was learning something different. She was learning how to make fighting unnecessary. The small human cadet was not just a student. She was a promise that intelligence could be more powerful than any weapon. The simulation room looked different today. Darker, more serious. This was the final test that would decide everything. Massive holographic displays surrounded the training area. Each cadet would face the most difficult challenge of their entire academy life. The scenario was simple on the surface, impossible in reality. A complete galactic conflict simulation. Multiple planetary systems were at war. Resources were running out. Millions of lives hung in the balance. The cadets would need to find a solution that saved the most lives with the least amount of destruction. Most cadets prepared their biggest weapons. Most cadets thought about how to fight. Eunji brought nothing but her digital tablet and a small communication device. Commander Kwon watched carefully. His cybernetic eye scanned each cadet as they prepared. Jadmin, the massive Krelden cadet, looked ready to crush entire planets. The Vortex cadet prepared to shift between multiple dimensional states. Each alien species showed off their most powerful abilities. Eunji stood quietly in the corner. The academy's main hall was different today. Something had changed. Eunji walked through the corridor, and people noticed her now. Not because she was loud, not because she was big, but because she was different. Janmin, the massive Krelden cadet who once mocked her, now walked beside her. His rocky body moved carefully, making sure not to bump into her. Where he once saw a weak human, he now saw something else. "I want to understand," Jamin said. His voice was softer now, less like grinding stones, more like someone trying to learn. The other cadets watched. The Vortex cadet, who could change between solid and gas, listened carefully when Yunji spoke. During training sessions, they asked her questions, not to challenge her, but to learn. Commander Quan observed everything. The leadership of the academy had noticed something special. Yunji wasn't just a good student. She was changing how they thought about combat, about strategy, about solving problems. In the past, the academy trained warriors, people who could fight, who could destroy, who could win battles. Yunji was teaching them something different: how to prevent battles, how to solve problems before they became fights. Her previous missions began to leak out. Small stories, carefully hidden reports. Each one showed how she had stopped conflicts before they began, how she had saved lives without firing a single weapon. The other cadets started studying her methods. They asked for her notes. They wanted to understand how she thought. During one training session, a complex scenario was presented: a potential conflict between two space stations. Most cadets prepared their combat strategies. Weapons ready, shields up. Yunji sat down and started writing a communication protocol. "What are you doing?" Jamin asked. "Preventing a war," she said simply. And she did. Her communication plan resolved the entire scenario without a single shot being fired. The other cadets watched in amazement. This was not how they had been trained before. The academy's leadership called a special meeting. Commander Quan presented Yunji's file, her achievements, her unique approach to conflict resolution. "We have been training warriors," he said. "She is training problem solvers." The other instructors listened carefully. They understood something important. In a galaxy full of different species, fighting was easy. Understanding was hard. Yunji represented something new, a different way of thinking about conflict, a different way of seeing the universe. Jamin approached her after the meeting. "I was wrong about humans," he said. His rocky face showed something close to respect. "We thought you were weak, but you are strong in a way we never understood." Yunji simply smiled. "Strength is not about how hard you can hit," she said. "It's about how well you can understand." The academy was changing, and it was changing because of a small human cadet who looked weak, but was anything but weak. Commander Quan made a note in his digital log. The future of military strategy was not about bigger weapons. It was about bigger understanding. Yunji continued walking down the corridor. Small, quiet, easy to overlook. But not anymore. The mission briefing room was quiet. Too quiet. Yunji stood at the center, surrounded by military leaders from multiple planetary systems. Her small frame seemed almost out of place, but nobody was looking at her size anymore. They were listening to her words. This was not just another mission. This was a mission that could change everything. 3 different planetary systems were on the brink of a massive conflict. Millions of lives hung in the balance. Massive fleets were prepared to fight. Weapons were ready. Destruction was moments away. And they had called her. Commander Quan stood beside her. His cybernetic eye scanned the room. The other military leaders looked nervous. They had tried everything. Diplomatic talks, military negotiations. Nothing worked. Yunji had a different plan. Her digital tablet came alive with complex communication patterns. She wasn't preparing for war. She was preparing to prevent war. "The conflict is not about territory," she explained. Her voice was calm, clear. "It's about resources, about misunderstandings that have grown over generations." The holographic display showed multiple star systems, complicated communication networks, decades of hidden tensions. Jamin, now her strongest supporter, watched from the side of the room. The massive Krelden cadet who once mocked her now believed in her completely. He had seen her methods work too many times to doubt her now. Yunji began to work. Her fingers moved across the digital tablet. She was not just sending messages. She was creating understanding, translating, explaining, finding the small misunderstandings that had grown into massive conflicts. Hours passed. The military leaders watched in silence. This was not how they had been trained to solve problems. This was something different. Slowly, communication channels opened. Leaders who had refused to speak began to listen. Conflicts that seemed impossible to solve started to break down. Yunji was doing something remarkable. She was solving a problem that entire armies could not solve. The holographic display began to change. Red zones of conflict turned into zones of communication. Potential battle lines became discussion points. Weapons of war transformed into tools of understanding. When the mission ended, something amazing happened. No shots were fired. No lives were lost. 3 planetary systems that were moments away from total war now sat down to talk, to understand each other. Commander Quan looked at the results. His cybernetic eye scanned the data. Yunji had not just prevented a war. She had created a path to peace. "This is the promise of humanity," he said quietly. The other military leaders understood something important. Humans were not just another species in the galaxy. They were something special, a species that could see solutions where others saw only conflict. Yunji finished her report. Her digital tablet went quiet. She looked the same as always, small, quiet, easy to overlook. But everyone in the room knew the truth. She was a legend, not because she was the strongest fighter, but because she could solve problems that no one else could solve. As she left the mission briefing room, a small smile crossed her face. Another conflict prevented. Another set of lives saved. This was her mission. This was her strength. The promise of humanity was not about how hard they could fight. It was about how well they could understand.